I was going to say I'm happy to be here. I'm not so sure I'm happy to be here because I'm not particularly sure why I'm here. I just want to start out that way. I'm not an academic. I'm not a cleric. I haven't studied theology in any formal way. I'm also not part of these sort of ongoing inter-religious dialogue kind of things. I'm a really tiny local authority. I'm not even a local authority. I'm just a guy who goes to church in Provo, Utah. And after Elder Porter spoke, my wife turned to me and said, "Wow, what are you going to say?" Because, as it turns out, not that I could be anywhere close to as eloquent or thoughtful as Elder Porter, but I was going to devote a fair amount of my remarks to the issues of secularization and why one important reason for interreligious dialogue is what I view as a wave of militant secularization in our country and the world in general and our country in particular. So I thought, what could I, between then and now, I thought, well, I'll revise some of my remarks here. So I'm going to make a couple of points. One of them, to start out with, doesn't have anything to do with Judaism, and the rest will have a lot to do with Judaism. Last night, where I spent some time with Randall and others, I had the question, several people asked me, well, how do you, I don't exactly remember how it came up, Randall, but the idea was, have things happened to you from a religious perspective outside of your religion that have influenced your religion? And actually, in thinking of this whole conference, it has caused me to reflect on, well, what is my feeling and what have been my relations with other religions? I never thought of myself as an interreligious dialogue guy. I'll just say that. But over my life, and this probably is explained by a very weird fact, and you raised it, Jenna. My family moved from Salt Lake City, Utah, to Los Angeles, California in 1959. And that Howard thing was like a big deal, and I even remember that. So we moved. I moved from the avenues in Salt Lake City. I didn't know any non-Mormons. Today, of course, if you live in the avenues, that's not true, but between 1949 and 1959, it was true. I knew one Jewish kid, and of course has been referred to in all kinds of back and forth here. We didn't really think of them as other, the kind of same way we would have thought of Catholics as other. You know, the Jews. Well, they're sort of like cousins, maybe even. You know, I mean, when you're a 9-year-old kid, that's what you think. If you're a Mormon growing up on 6th Avenue and 8th Street in Salt Lake City. So I moved to Southern California, and I am other in a really big way, other. How many wives does your dad have? First question. I'm not making this up. Standing out in front of Mrs. Kenichi's 5th grade class, Eric Hansen, Roman Catholic, later one of my closest friends for the next many years. How many wives does your dad have? First questions. I'm thinking, what is that all about? And I didn't feel hostile, by the way. I didn't feel that it was hostile. It was just sort of, I thought, wow, I'm the only Mormon here, which is true. I was the only Mormon in my class. I think that had a pretty big effect on me as a young person. I never set out to sort of think about other religions for any other reason than the intrinsic interest in other religions. Most of you don't really know me, and maybe some of you who know me think you know somebody who's like me, but is actually maybe not me. So I thought I'd just touch, just for a minute or two, on some of the things. This is really an answer, I think, to your question last night. I am an active Latter-day Saint. I don't want to, I don't know all the words back and forth. I have no desire to convert any of you, and I don't really desire to be converted. I'm pretty confident in what I believe. But my own belief as a Latter-day Saint has been really deeply enriched and enhanced by significant experiences I've had with other religions, primarily Protestant, Roman Catholic, and I'm going to include Orthodox in that, but not just your kind of Orthodoxy, but the whole deal, and Judaism. I apologize that I have had very limited interaction with Islam in my life, but just to touch on a few things. And they're honestly, as I thought about it over the last few weeks, thinking about this whole interreligious thing, an enormous amount, not like a little bit. And so I'm going to just touch on two or three things, but they are really only emblematic of a lot of things. I believe I have a much deeper understanding of the spirit of disciplines because of a professor actually right here at USC, Dallas Willard. Is a wonderful person, and my wife and I were at a retreat with him one time. He's written quite a bit about the spirit of disciplines. He's a philosophy professor. But in answer to a question in our group, we were the only Mormons in this group. In fact, before we went to this particular retreat, I mentioned to the person that we're Mormons, and now if that's really going to it's not going to bug us, but if it bothers anybody else, we won't go. We don't want to cause anxiety. But we went, and it was a wonderful experience. And Dallas Willard, I'm saying this to Latter-day Saints, someone asked him a question, what's it going to be like in the next world? What is that like? And he said, well, I don't know, which would be the right answer, because actually nobody knows. Even people who think they know don't know. But I don't know, he said, but I have a feeling it has something to do, that our earth life here has something to do with training for reigning. He said, when I read the New Testament, it says that I'm a joint heir with Jesus Christ. I don't know what that means, but it sounds a lot like I'm in training for reigning. Now, I'd submit to a lot of Latter-day Saints, that's about as good an explanation of the plan of salvation as you can come up with. I heard that from a deeply reflective Protestant. I won't keep multiplying words on that. I'd just say also, though, that I don't believe I could understand and feel as strongly about my own faith without having been deeply influenced over many long years by not just St. Augustine, but interpreters and writers about St. Augustine. And again, just one little vignette that applies to my own feeling as a Latter-day Saint. When St. Augustine says he heard, take up the book and read, everybody needs that. Everyone needs to do that. I believe that was a spiritual experience for him, and I believe that applies to me, and it refined and deepened my own view of my own faith, even though it was many, many centuries before. There are many lesser known to Latter-day Saints. There's a professor who's now become a Catholic. When I first read him, he wasn't a Catholic, Paul Griffith. By the way, almost every Catholic I know who's converted through St. Thomas, not through St. Augustine, but anyway, this is he wrote a book called Religious Reading, and it's a very profound book on how religious texts can really work into your life. Not a Latter-day Saint, but deeply affected my own view of my own life. And I might say one of the most interesting books, important books I've read was Love and St. Augustine by a Jewish woman, Hannah Arendt, and a very significant book talking about, okay, there are two kinds of love. There's a love, the charitable love, the love of God, love of things above, and love of things that bring you gratification and things on the earth. I'm going to say that any Latter-day Saint could learn a lot from that and not have feel any threat to their own faith. Okay. I don't mean to make this quite so personal, but that's actually all I can do, because I haven't written anything big about the subject. I do want to talk about Jews and Mormons. Originally, when I was approached by this, I kind of thought I was going to be on the Catholic panel, which I would feel completely comfortable with, by the way. You know, a long history of thinking of things Catholic. My wife has sometimes been nervous that I'm edging. I'm not going to become Catholic, but I find a lot of satisfaction in Catholic theology, quite a lot. However, I'm rightly on this panel for reasons, again, not having anything to do with sort of forethought about bringing Jews and Mormons together. In fact, maybe a little resistant to that. I find lots of Latter-day Saints make way too easy comparisons between Jewish history, which is like infinite, and our 200-year history. Yes, we've been persecuted, and in fact there are important similarities in the sense of very, very few faiths have been systematically, maybe even systemically persecuted by the state, just for whatever that's worth. There aren't a lot of people in that category, and we are both in that category. It's just that they've been suffering that for 4,000 years. We've been suffering it for not a tiny fraction of that time, and even that was only a very brief period of our history. Happily, as Greg was sort of alluding to earlier, you know, we've sort of embraced normalcy. We're kind of normal. We're just like all of you, really, honest. We're just like all of you, really. Please believe that, okay? So, let me talk about things Jewish for a second. Again, I don't want to get, you know, overly too personal here, but I think my experience actually is kind of important for how I came to some of these views. As I mentioned, we moved to California in 1959, a very happy time. My earliest friends were Jews. It turns out I went to a high school that had lots and lots of Jews. So in the 50s, there was the sort of 60s, people said, oh, I'm not anti-Semitic. Some of my best friends are Jews, right? Actually, most of my friends and most of my enemies were Jews. So it was like the whole thing. In student council at our high school, there were like 3 or 4 of us who weren't Jews. And so things were empty, pretty empty during high holidays. So it turns out that some of those friends became really close for a long period of time, over many years. And I didn't intend to talk about baptism for the dead, but just a few years ago, it turns out one of Rabbi, I don't know if he's your immediate predecessor or some successor or predecessor before that, a fellow named David Elcott, who's with the American Jewish Committee. David is one of my oldest friends. We both grew up in relatively poor circumstances in the San Fernando Valley, and we kept this weird friendship up for years. We don't agree on anything, by the way. We don't agree on, literally, not on anything. Forget about things Jewish. He is way to the left of where I am. I know some of you are saying that's not too hard, but it's actually, it's pretty hard. But I did represent the Israeli Policy Forum in Washington for a couple of years, which is, I think, probably to the left of where the rabbi is, but certainly to the left of AIPAC. Anyhow, I get a call from my friend David Elcott a few years ago saying, I just met with a guy named Todd Christofferson, and he's telling me stuff. Can I trust him? So I think you're, for Latter-day Saints, you're thinking, well, wait. This is, by the way, he's only a 70 at the time. He's not an apostle. That would have been like really big if he were an apostle, like a big E kind of a thing. And so but still, he's a really, really important person. And David was wondering, is it really true that the church tells you shouldn't baptize Jews doing a baptism for the dead? And I said yes, and anyway, it turns out I had a little insight, a little window into that whole Jewish Latter-day Saint dialogue over that subject. Well, I will say a little bit. I guess why do I think this is a subject worth talking about? I've been, for reasons not really clear to me, not necessarily by choice, but pretty deeply involved in things Jewish for a lot of my adult life. I'm pretty deeply involved in the development of the Holocaust Memorial in Washington. I was the only Gentile on the fundraising committee. I was a member of the Holocaust Memorial Council, but I actually was on the fundraising committee. And that was a very fascinating insight to me, insight into the world of Judaism in America. I'm sorry just to give a little biography here, but it's kind of relevant to where I think I'm going to end up here. I was involved in bringing Abba Eban to Utah for the first time. I happened to be with some Jewish friends in New York. They said, hey, let's go, we're going to have breakfast with Abba Eban. And I kind of imagined a big event where he spoke, but it was 8 people sitting around a table. In fact, I was the only non-Jewish person. He said, well, you're from Utah. Okay, Mormons will get a big kick out of this because Jews are totally horizontal, and we are pretty totally vertical in terms of hierarchy. He said, I want you to arrange a meeting between my friend Ezra Benson and me before I die. So I'm thinking, wow, I'm not part of the vertical thing, and I'm just part of the horizontal thing. But I ended up calling up then Elder Hunter and mentioning, I said, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm really, really sorry to bother you, but I just had breakfast with this man, and he wants to meet his friend Ezra Benson. So there was an interesting back and forth about that, which is sort of like a really inside baseball story, but I'm not going to share it because tapes are running. But eventually we had that meeting. Eban came. He toured Utah. He had a really interesting experience, a lot of interesting things to say. And I will just say, I guess I'm a little bit of a cynic. I believe often Mormons overstate lots of things, not religious things, but overstate relationships and things. And I thought, well, okay, so people say they know Abba Eban. I'm just going to say the electricity, the emotion at the meeting between President Benson and Abba Eban was unbelievable. And President Benson could not speak. They declined the meeting at first. And hey, he's getting ready to die. But Eban said, I want to meet him. And it was electric. The emotion was really, really deep. I asked Ambassador Eban, well, why do you want to meet Ezra Benson? He said, well, because he was the Secretary of Agriculture in the early 50s, and we were starving. And he arranged for millions of tons of wheat to be sent to Israel. And it was Eban who negotiated that. There's another story about Daddy Collett coming to Salt Lake City. I won't go into that because I want to say, why does it matter to me? Why did I agree to give this talk, not being, again, any of the things that you should be to give this talk? I will refer back to Elder Porter's talk on remarks on secularization. I'm not a scholar, but I've been deeply absorbed for many, many years on secularization and relativism and materialism. And maybe I'm just paranoid. It could be. But I feel that the threat, as they say, I'm not an international relations guy either, but I feel like there's an existential threat to religion posed by secular people. And so those of us who are not secular on the other side of that divide, we need to be pals. Just to loosely quote, I guess it was Benjamin Franklin, we're either going to hang separately or we're going to hang together. I think we need to hang together. I have read deeply in things Jewish. I've read deeply in things Catholic. I have no desire to join any of those churches, but I feel an immense solidarity between all of us. Everyone, when I was just one little last thing, when you grow up in the Mormon church, you hear, where did I come from? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? You hear those things. When you're a Mormon and growing up in Salt Lake City, you think, oh, those are primary questions or junior Sunday school questions. Those are questions. But you realize everyone has to answer those questions, and everybody wrestles with those questions. And the wrestling of any of those people in a faithful context can help your own faith. And I've felt that in my own life. So I just say, for people of faith, whether they're Jewish, whether they're of any kind of Christian, Islamic, as far as this conference goes, people of faith, at the end of the day, you can only answer those questions. All of those questions come down to one of two answers. In the beginning, God, or in the beginning, not God. That's it. I hate to be so arbitrary, but there's not like an in-between. In the beginning, God, or in the beginning, not God. Those of us on the in the beginning, God side of things need to stick together. Thank you very much.